Greetings, good gentlemen of the Red Pill Persuasion. It's time for the fourth installment of my Fight Club movie analysis, and as we prepare for today's talk, I'd like to start with a little bit about the concept of the shadow and what that term means from the psychological perspective. Of course, that comes with the caveat that psychology is not a whole lot more than a field of opinions. It's a discipline, not a science, and it's guided by theories, not facts. Still, I found some of those theories helpful to use as a model in the effort to understand things that can't be qualified in more scientific terms, the shadow being among them. According to Freud, the cigar-puffing cokehead of psychological fame, the shadow is viewed as a negative psychological entity. It is the repressed, reptilian, and dangerous parts of ourselves that the conscious mind doesn't recognize as part of our identity and doesn't want to. It's characterized by things like avarice, criminality, violence, and most anything else we would like to believe isn't a part of who we are. To Freud, the shadow is best kept repressed, at bay in the lives we live. Jung, on the other hand, believed that the shadow can contain anything of which we're not fully conscious, or on which we lack the resolve to act, which may well include positive characteristics, things like healthy assertiveness, rebellion from authority or groupthink, and the like. And to Jung, the shadow, properly exploited, is something we can draw on for strength and self-improvement. In this light, I think that Jung's model is more useful in examining the nature of Tyler Durden, his relationship with the narrator, and the moral of their shared story. Tyler inspires strength in the narrator that he previously couldn't imagine. So far, we've seen this result in our narrator carrying himself with renewed self-confidence, and even some of Tyler's trademark cockiness. He has shunned the world of consumer obsession and has dropped the obsequiousness that previously defined his role as an employee. The narrator is no longer an anxiety-ridden insomniac who impulsively obeys authority like an automaton. He is starting to find his own tune, and he's starting to march to it with help and inspiration from his shadow. If you sense a but coming, you're absolutely right. And it's not a small but. It's the size of Texas, and it begins to unfold in the iconic scene from the movie, the first time Tyler lays out the rules for Fight Club. "Gentlemen, welcome to Fight Club," he says. "The first rule of Fight Club is that you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is that you do not talk about Fight Club." Durden then goes on to explain the rest of the rules which all govern how fights will be conducted, sort of like a red pill Marquess of Queensberry. But a closer look at the scene reveals a good bit more. At first blush, the first two rules appear to be intended to shield the secrecy of Fight Club, a way to protect the men who belong from prying eyes, and that is probably superficially true. However, as the storyline progresses, we will undeniably find that there's a dual meaning at play here. Reframing it in terms of the closer look, we find that the abbreviated coercive side of the narrator's shadow is speaking. "Gentlemen, welcome to Fight Club," he said. "The first rule of Fight Club is that you don't talk. The second rule of Fight Club is that you don't talk." That's what he's saying. You don't talk about your lives. You don't talk about your pain. You don't talk about your dreams and ambitions. You don't talk about anything. You just channel all your rage into bashing each other's brains out. This is Tyler's solution to the emotive, Kleenex-toting feminized world from which the narrator has just escaped. Don't talk, fight. Tear each other apart. Destroy yourselves and each other. That's the Fight Club mandate. Tyler confirms this as he punches his next opponent in the balls until he submits. And there's the rub, guys. Fight Club is nothing more than what men have always been programmed to do underneath the facade of male gallantry and the role of protector and provider. The movie dramatizes this dichotomy, this dual existence as qualified, acceptable men versus obedient lemmings. And importantly, how men are required to live in denial of their dual nature. This is further driven home when next the narrator tells us, and I quote, "Fight Club only exists between the hours of when Fight Club starts and Fight Club ends. Even if I could tell someone I had a good fight, I wouldn't be talking to the same man. Who you were in Fight Club is not who you were in the rest of the world." Does this sound uncomfortably familiar? If so, it's because it's perfectly analogous to the existence of most men and the scratching, clawing, unspoken, and mindless competition that ever lies just under the surface of our more civilized, buttoned-down facades. It is men's collective shadow, driving us relentlessly toward success and toward our graves. The narrator alludes to this again in the very next scene. On a bus, he condescendingly points to a Gucci men's underwear ad featuring a typically hairless, emasculated male form and questions Tyler, "Is that what a man looks like?" Tyler laughs. "Self-improvement is masturbation," he says. "Now, self-destruction." He doesn't finish that thought, but his inflection makes the sentiment clear. Self-destruction, not self-improvement, is Tyler's path. To Tyler, there is no middle ground, no thoughtful alternative, just the black and white choice between quiet, desperate feminization and slow suicide as a man. The narrator remains oblivious to this darker side of his shadow and grows even more comfortable in his new role in life, assimilating more into Tyler's worldview. That level of comfort won't be tolerated by Marla, however, and she calls him on the phone after having taken the better part of an entire prescription of Xanax. It's the classic borderline female dramatic play for attention, a suicide threat, a fabricated crisis demanding the narrator's immediate attention. This is too much for the narrator, and we are informed through the following scenes that he summons his shadow, Tyler, to handle Marla for him, which he does by bringing Marla back to the house and fucking her. This is the first overt indication that Tyler will ultimately prove destructive to the narrator. Not only does he turn Marla's damsel ploy into an opportunity for sex, he brings her back to their home, once again intruding into the life of the narrator, killing his buzz, as it were. Now, to digress for a moment, I have seen at least one comment to these talks speculating that Marla, like Tyler, isn't real, that she's just another component of the narrator's shadow. I've seen that idea postulated in some of the other reviews of the film that I've read and watched in doing research for these talks. Personally, I'm not buying it. First, in painting the relationship between the narrator and Tyler, the movie makers have been careful to make sure that Tyler and Marla don't appear at the same time as the narrator. And there are at least two scenes where we see Marla recognized directly by other characters where the narrator is also present. One was the scene where Marla sells the clothes she's stolen, and another is in one of the self-help groups, in particular where she is hugging the narrator during one of the Time to Cry segments. Finally, there's the police showing up at her door to intervene during her hunky-dory suicide attempt. To entertain this as plausibly part of the narrator's shadow, we would have to accept that he had another apartment and another life, perhaps as Marla. The only way to accept that all this is plausible is to also assume that the group facilitator, the police, and the woman who bought the clothes that Marla stole were also characters generated by the narrator's shadow. That's a bit too complicated for my liking, so I'm going with the idea that Marla is part of the narrator's real-world experience. Finally, for this talk, we conclude with the narrator's attempt to find inner peace, even as his shadow Tyler is rattling the rafters, banging Marla. This seems to be a conscious effort on his part, as he opines while Tyler and Marla are making lights flicker and pounding chunks of plaster from the ceiling. I could have moved to a different room, one on the 3rd floor where I might not have heard them, but I didn't. I became the calm little center of the world. I was the Zen master. Only he really wasn't. He starts becoming disenchanted with the arrangement, having thrown off his attachments to material life and now living in what amounts to squalor. His shadow, formerly his friend, is constantly occupied with fucking Marla. The stress intensifies when the detective with the arson unit calls him to say that his apartment was blown up with homemade explosives. "I am Jack's cold sweat," he says, indicating that he is aware that it was him, or rather his shadow Tyler, who caused the explosion. Following this, the tension in the house is lessened with the temporary eviction of Marla. The narrator and Tyler are once again connected, and the narrator's focus is able to return to the things that have been bringing him peace. "What are we doing tonight?" the narrator asks, ready for a distraction. "Tonight," Tyler replies, "we make soap." And with that, we conclude this portion of my analysis on Fight Club, with the making of soap about to signal a red-hot escalation of events in the film that push it at a mad pace toward its conclusion. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and we'll see you next time.